Hi guys, my name is Mr. Hanks. Welcome to Lesson 3 for Unit 4, Chapter 2. This is Lesson 3, The Great Mississippi Flood of 1927. Our objective for the day is to describe the causes, effects, and government response to the Great Mississippi River Flood of 1927. So this was a truly tragic event that happened, and there were a lot of contributing factors, and we'll try to delve in and see if we can pull some of those things out. Our bell ringer for the day, just for you to kind of consider. Turn that. All right. How does flooding impact an area? What could be damaged or lost? Could human interference cause floods? So can human activities actually lead to floods? And that's just kind of something. And there's a little, not really a little, but there's a huge aspect of science that applies to this, like with the levee systems and stuff like that, but we'll get into that in a minute. So we have our reading for the day, the Mississippi River Flood of 1927. And let's see, where do I start on this? At the time this happened, we had a Republican president, Calvin Coolidge, who was the president at the time of the Great Flood. So, for example, African Americans were often badly mistreated in the refugee camps overseen by the federal government. In addition, in the wake of the flood, instead of providing government assistance, U.S. Secretary of Commerce Herbert Hoover relied on private reconstruction corporations to meet the needs of people displaced by the flood, because a lot of people were pushed out. This didn't work. Hoover proposed land reforms that would break up large southern plantations and create small farms, turning sharecroppers into owners. But such reforms failed to happen. The federal government spent no money whatsoever to aid to the flood victims. So feeling betrayed, many of those African Americans switched their political loyalties from the Republican Party to the Democratic Party. The flood was also a push factor contributing to the Great Migration of the African Americans from the South to the North. So when we talked about that Great Migration, so far the only real reason we knew was better job opportunities and, not as much segregative policies in the North. But now we know that the Mississippi Flood 1927 also played quite a huge role in that. As we read, we'll take our notes here. I have 3 questions to go with it. And how did the levees built along the Mississippi River contribute to the Great Flood of 1927? And this is kind of like the science behind it. So normally the flood water would have spread across the natural drainage areas and have been absorbed back into the ground. However, the levees prevented that flood water from spreading beyond the riverbanks as it traveled south toward the Gulf of Mexico. And as a result, the water got deeper and built up pressure, becoming more powerful and destructive. Kind of leads to the next one, how many people were displaced by the Great Flood of 1927. Basically, over 1 million people were displaced by the flood. And the financial losses reached $400 million, the equivalent of $6.8 billion in today's policies. That's not a good thing. That's huge, especially for that time. Why did African Americans suffer from the flood more than any other? And you got to remember, African American families made up 75% of the population of the Mississippi Delta, and about 500,000 African Americans lost their homes and livelihoods. Railroad companies and plantation owners did not want these people, their source of cheap labor, to leave the area, and they partnered with the Red Cross to set up refugee camps where African Americans were forced to work. Their living conditions in those camps were horrible. They were inferior to those they enjoyed by the whites in their refugee camps, because remember, segregation is a thing. In addition, the government promised to compensate people whose homes were destroyed when the levee at St. Bernard parishes was dynamited, but this didn't happen. So just to kind of add in on this, government and private sector response to the flood hurt the rural poors of Louisiana, many of whom lost their homes and were forced to work in refugee camps. The government did not follow through on its promise to compensate people who suffered losses from the flood. Government engineers also cut channels to strengthen the river, causing physical damage to many communities. Common people were very unhappy with these events, and guess who takes their side? Huey P. Long. So we're going to see him starting to kind of make his appearance and everything. His apparent sympathy and concern for them made him very popular, and even will help him get elected in the next election. We do have a few things I want to talk about, like the Backwater Blues, a few of those primary resources. Many songs were written about the Great Flood of 1927, including Mississippi Heavy Water Blues by Barbecue Bob, High Water Everywhere by Charlie Patton, When the Levee Breaks by Memphis Minnie, and Kansas Joe McCoy's High Water and by Bob Dylan, and Louisiana 1927 by Randy Newman. I'm going to ask my students to listen to some of those recordings, and we'll kind of like look at some pictures too that all kind of flows with this and everything like that to go with everything, because that's the flood zone. So yeah, remember 75% of those people were African Americans at the time, almost 6.4 billion in damage when that's happening. This was their flood policy revisit. Eventually we'll get to that as well, because remember, this is going to, those levees, that's going to be a situation for Hurricane Katrina when we get to that in lesson 2 of unit 7, the modern era. So that's a little ways down the road, but we'll begin to that first week of March-ish. Good. And our DOK question for the day: to draw conclusions about how government response to natural disasters has changed since 1927. I mean, you gotta look at the establishment of FEMA, and to avoid going on another political tirade, I'm not going to talk about it, but just looking at how government response matters now, especially when people want to get reelected. So that's all I'll say about that. We have our bell ringer today. The Mississippi flood in 1920. Our flashcard: displaced more than 1 million people, killed hundreds, and caused hundreds of millions of dollars in damage. So remember, Huey P. Long, he's going to really reach out to these people. So, and our exit ticket: how did the government and private sector responses to the Great Flood set the stage for Huey Long's rise to power in Louisiana? So I just want to kind of, you get that from the reading. You can kind of get that from some of the songs they wrote too, because some of the songs were written in kind of support of Huey P. Long as well. Speaking of which, that will be our next lesson as well. Lesson 4, Huey P. Long, the man, the myth, the legend himself. Awesome guy. Love teaching about him. Love it. And I'll see y'all in the next episode. That's it for this video. Remember to grow your strong minds, great hearts, live the ARC way, love yourselves, and love each other. See y'all in the next video. Bye.